Okay. Look. I have really, really important things I need to be doing right about now, and you're going to have to come clean. Okay? You're going to have to come clean. You remember when you and the girls used to watch America's Next Top Model all the time? You know, if you can't love yourself, how the hell you gonna love somebody else? Right. And remember when you all used to get on me because I used to watch The Apprentice? And you didn't understand. You didn't understand why I watched The Apprentice. Yeah. Well, I also didn't know about all those deals you guys hooked up in New York before you came out to Chicago. And this is a big deal now because you've spent over 10 years trying to keep some sort of non disclose or confidentiality on it. And it's not at all about what you told me it was about at the time. And in the meantime, if you had been honest about whatever else was going on, then we could have gotten to what apparently was unfolding at the same time that they were trying to set all that shit up on us. And I'm really getting tired of in my background, every day in my background, is how somebody has hustled a bunch of deals with you. And for whatever reason, they decided to throw in with you and not me. And now it's a big clusterfuck. Why? Let me just read you something really quick. I had no idea what he was talking about, nor did anyone else to whom I later repeated this warning. But I told him I understood and thanked him for the advice. It was my first taste of the paranoid weirdness of Washington. The White House interviews followed the same script as at Treasury, with even more love expressed for the office. The penultimate and most important interview was with the White House counsel, Fred Fielding. He is a Washington legend and served as Ronald Reagan's White House counsel for the first 5 years of his presidency. He was brought back, get this, he was brought back to the White House by George W. Bush to right the ship after the troubled tenures of Alberto Gonzales and Harriet Myers. As I was escorted into his office, I was cheered to see that William Burke, a recent office alum who was now Deputy White House Counsel, was sitting in on the interview. You get that? Right? It was around the same time. On Mike's advice, but this is the other thing too. Paulson had announced the first major outflow of taxpayer money, a controversial new TARP program, the $250 billion Capital Purchase Program, or CPP, which would provide direct equity injections into the banks and which I thought could be highly vulnerable to fraud. Injections and vulnerable. That's the current this is on. Do you understand? Then it says CPP had provoked some howls of outrage because it took the spending of TARP money in a very different direction from how TARP had originally been pitched to Congress. Sound familiar? The initial TARP proposal made by Paulson was for the money to be used to buy large quantities of the troubled or toxic mortgages and mortgage related bonds that were clogging so many banks' balance sheets, hence the name Troubled Asset Relief Program. The sharp decline in the value of those assets starting in 2007 was what had precipitated the crisis. And the argument was that the banks could not be stabilized until large quantities of them were taken off their books, as in no receipts are produced because that doesn't need to be accounted for until the reconciliation comes due after the bills have come in. Right? Oh, I'm sorry, we just didn't have receipts. I mean, people get busy, they have a lot to think about. But now the bills are coming due, and it's time for the audit in order for the funders to be able to get what they need to meet the grant specifications, and we're not able to reconcile because there aren't any receipts. Congress had approved of TARP in large part because buying those assets from the banks would not only hopefully prevent the banks from failing, but because Treasury would then be in control of so many of the troubled mortgage loans that had gone into the toxic assets. That would allow Treasury to modify the terms of the loans in order to give foreclosure relief to struggling homeowners across the country. A major priority for many Democrats in Congress, which would in turn help to stabilize the cratering housing market. You know what this sounds like to me? Modify the terms of the loan. Well, you go in, you expect that you're going to be doing one job function, up to and including compensation or payment, but then things need to be modified. And you're supposed to make accessible other assets that had not previously been identified as being necessary in order to do the job. Well, I mean, it can be very complicated if there are secret terms associated with the operationalization that prevent one from getting a true understanding of what the actual costs are, or, dare I say, the actual level of trouble involved. After initially being voted down, TARP was amended and finally passed by Congress and signed into law by President Bush on October 3rd, 2008. Well, what had happened by that time? Within 2 years. Within 2 years of that very date. But this is the best part. Not the $350 billion. That's only part of it. Members of Congress soon began voicing strong objections to Treasury's broad interpretation of its authority to use TARP funds for CPP. Do you understand? There's an understanding the funds are supposed to be used for one thing, but the one who actually is engaged in assigning the funds as well as accounting for the funds has a broad authority that's supposed to be unquestioned and also supposed to be unverified, including by having the person who's responsible for paying and reconciling the payments provide any form of at least witness to the actual activities. That's pretty much what it says, except we're talking about Congress. I know. It probably involved women in leadership. I'm just saying. It probably had something to do with people in leadership and what it meant to be in leadership and have to make decisions, including decisions that need financing, and then being somebody that was not allowed to participate in leadership, but was supposed to finance whatever leadership determined was supposed to occur. Right? Well, who ends up getting blamed in the end? Continuing on, as part of the announcement of CPP, Paulson, along with the Federal Reserve and the FDIC, endorsed the, get this, health of the 9 original banks that had received funds. Then it lists them, and also declared that additional CPP funds would be available only to similarly healthy and viable banks. It sounds like that bill regarding members of Congress being mandated to receive health care insurance from a marketplace that allowed for them to be matched with somebody participating in the marketplace who was valued at a comparable income level. Yeah. Right? Well, see, this is my concern. They're talking about matching, and then they're talking about oversight of these 9 particular institutions. The problem they also talk about is things that happen when it comes to following up on that oversight. The understanding was originally the individuals were supposed to get a personal relationship to reestablish or reevaluate their credit. And then the bonds that were involved were supposed to be recharacterized according to that. But that's not what happened. Somebody cut deals to let the banks cover up for crime and not prosecute crime. Probably by convincing people that there was no importance or there was no reason to cooperate with law enforcement. And that meant that they didn't need to acquire evidence. And they didn't need to consider what was going on as being about the acquisition of evidence. I'm just saying, it's a very big deal. And at the end of the day, it sounds like somebody had other ambitions than what they said, and that it was a premeditated strategic arrangement that attempted to cast people into roles they were ill suited for, including concepts of who should be in leadership and who was not supposed to be in leadership, but had some sort of obligation to finance. Well, here's the thing, the guy who wrote this book, he's in your alumni network. Well, I don't have an alumni network, or at least I didn't when I knew you. That's the problem. I do now. I have an alumni network now. And because you weren't honest about what was happening at the time, they've completely mischaracterized my alumni network, and I'm pissed about it. Get it together.